Have you ever been online, either email or social media, and read something that made your blood boil? It's really tempting to pound out a quick, snarky response or a long explanation of why the other person is so very wrong. So if you haven't personally felt this way, my guess is that you may have seen it from others. And while there are certainly situations where people need to speak up and correct misunderstandings, correct misinformation, a lot of the times these online conflicts can go nowhere. No one changes their mind and they just escalate, right? And while this might be frustrating, or maybe for some mildly entertaining in our personal lives, this kind of conflict can be destructive at work. So I'm Laura Black. I'm a professor of communication studies at Ohio University, and I study groups and the type of communication that helps people be effective and not effective in different group settings. So working remotely creates a lot of communication challenges, which can lead to misunderstandings and conflict. So in this session today, we're going to talk about some tips on how to avoid misunderstandings through clear communication and how leaders can recognize, manage, or even prevent the sort of interpersonal conflicts that can occur via technology. So let's first start by talking about misunderstanding. Misunderstanding happens because people have different ideas about what's being communicated and what things mean. This is very frequent. It happens a lot because understanding and meaning is something that happens between people. It's not something I individually have or you individually have. It's a sense of something that we share, right? So misunderstanding can be very common in online communication like email and other text-based technologies. And this is because those messages are missing the kind of nonverbal cues, context, and ability for sort of immediate clarification and adjustment that we have in our face-to-face settings. So to minimize misunderstanding in our own messages, we need to make concerted efforts to have clarity and kindness. This seems kind of obvious, but when we take a little closer look, it becomes more complicated. So clarity. How do we build clarity into our messages? One way is by using specific, concrete language instead of vague or abstract words like it or soon. Those things probably need to be more specific. In email, you might need to clarify ideas more thoroughly than you would in face-to-face meetings where people can ask questions. So put some thought into what you write and avoid vague terms that could be easily misconstrued to be something that isn't what you mean. There's a balance between being specific and being brief. If your message is too long, people stop reading or listening. So you want to be clear but succinct. One way to do this is to organize your ideas and make that organization or structure clear. Something like, in this email, I have 2 questions and 1 suggestion. This helps your reader know what to expect and follow along without getting confused or overwhelmed. You may need to emphasize specific tasks like due dates or action items by underlining them or something like that in the text of the message, but avoid going overboard. I've gotten some messages at work where some things are bold, others are underlined, some are indented, some are different colors, some things are in all caps. It's totally overwhelming and confusing, right? So keep this at a minimum, only emphasizing the things that are the most important actions. And it also helps to include a brief summary at the beginning. So treating this message more like it was a formal kind of document than kind of a casual ask can be really helpful in improving the clarity. So in addition to clarity, act with kindness. The kindness doesn't mean being like fake or sugary sweet or even like really sappy and personal. What I mean by kindness here is just being respectful and being mindful of the audience for your message. So we should remember that you're writing to a specific person, a colleague or team member who has their own perspective, their own emotions and needs, that they're not going to necessarily understand things in the same way that you do. We have to keep that in mind as we're writing. So be friendly. Can include a brief hello at the beginning of the message, thank people for their help, include just a short personal note, something like that sort of demonstrates your friendliness. End your message by inviting questions or checking understanding, ending with something like make sense or let me know what questions for you have or I look forward to hearing from you. These are ways to both check the clarity of your message and show some measure of kindness. So clarity and kindness in your own messages can go a long way. But what happens when you get a message you really disagree with? What if it seems rude or accusatory? Then what should you do? Or what if you witness other people engaging on your team with conflict over an email and you need to step in? So let's start with tips on how to respond to negative messages without escalating conflict. For most of us, the first step should almost always be take a minute before you respond. Don't send a rage reply. It might seem like it would be really satisfying to send a quick reply telling the person how wrong they are. But after those endorphins wear off, you can see the aftermath of that kind of message is not that great. So escalating conflict with a quick, scathing reply, very rarely the best option. So the goal here is not to ignore the problem by stepping away, or to take blame on yourself, or to give in to the other person. The goal here is just to allow yourself to feel those kind of hot emotions, do whatever it is you need to do to get those out. So express your personal frustrations, think through it a little bit while you are away from your keyboard. So the second step is to shift your thinking a bit. Instead of focusing on fault and blame, try to take a problem-solving orientation. Reflect personally on why you're feeling so frustrated and angry about this message. There might be a lot of reasons, right? But do some thinking before you reply. What is at the heart of the matter for you here? What's the most important thing? Why is this bothering you so much, right? That kind of reflection can help you figure out how you want to reply and what the nature of the problem is. So one piece of advice I got was to try to move from this gut reaction of, why is he such an idiot? To, what did I do that allowed him to be such an idiot? Ideally, though, I think you want to even move past that to, what can I do to address this misunderstanding so that we can stop being idiots, right? So when you're ready to reply, do this from a problem-solving orientation. So remember, clarity and kindness still important, even maybe especially as you disagree. So start with a friendly opening, even if it's just hello. Then summarize what you think the other person is saying, briefly. Don't repeat their entire message, but summarize it and ask if you're understanding their point correctly. Something like, if I understand correctly, I think you're saying da-da-da-da, right? So this paraphrasing goes a long way to build mutual understanding. It shows you're listening, which is something that's really hard to see in online discussions. And if you're wrong, and they really meant something else, this gives them a chance to clarify. But if your understanding of their perspective is right, is correct, you just disagree with it, then showing you understand their point is huge. It allows you to move the conversation forward, and it prevents the conflict from growing into people just talking past each other. That kind of mutual understanding is important. It gives you and the other person shared, firm ground to stand on in your conversation. This is important in any kind of conflict, but it is crucial in online discussions where we're missing that sort of personal connection of being together face to face. I also recommend using I statements that focus on your own perspective instead of you statements that often are heard as accusations, even if that's not how you mean them to sound. So something like, I'm concerned about that suggestion because, or I think we have a misunderstanding, are a lot easier for people to hear than you totally missed my point, you're confused, or you're wrong. Give reasons for your concern. Clarify your argument as needed, but do so in a way that's non-accusatory. If you have a lot of things to say here, again, think about what's your biggest concern. What's the biggest issue? Think about that reflection. What's at the heart of the matter here? Start with that. It's probably not necessary to list all the things in this response, so just focus on what the core issue is. Avoid the temptation to go on and on. Longer is not better in messages like this. And invite response. Remember, the goal here is not to have the final word. This is not a game show where you get points for like dropping the mic, right? The goal is to build shared understanding. Invite further conversation. If you want, offer to talk on the phone or web chat or something like that where you can speak in real time and have more of a dialogue. But even if you keep the discussion on email, let the other person know you're interested from hearing them and continuing the conversation. Finally, try to be kind and patient. This is a challenging time. People are under a lot of stress. People are stressed out and there's a lot going on. So be patient with the other person and be patient with yourself. Now, if you're a leader, you might find that you're managing other people's conflicts. If that's the case, try to use this same sort of problem-solving orientation. It's very important. And there are a few additional considerations. So pay attention to who's involved, what the conflict about, and where it's happening. Understanding the people involved, their relationship, any history they might have, and the context they're in are really important for helping you decide how to engage. Second, where is this conflict happening? Is this a private email that you've been sort of copied on or somebody forwarded to you? Is this on a group email message that's going out to everybody, or is it on social media? If it's either of those, you probably want to take it out of the public forum. Personal conflicts can escalate into much bigger problems if there's an audience or other people chiming in and taking sides. Unless this is an issue that is something that really needs to be addressed as the group as a whole, and sometimes this is. Sometimes dissent shows up as a way to highlight something that the group as a whole needs to talk about. Unless it's that, it's usually better, if this is more of a personal conflict, it's better to shift the bulk of the conversation into a more private setting. This means directly contacting the people involved and making a brief but clear statement to the group as a whole that you're addressing this concern directly, right? So if you're taking on the role of mediating a conflict, use those same skills of clear communication and demonstrating kindness that we discussed earlier. As a leader, you need to not get caught up in the little stuff, but instead stay focused on problem solving. You have to be the adult, right? So empathize with the people involved, paraphrase, summarize both sides as best you can, share your concerns clearly and in a non-accusatory way, and try to engage the people involved in a shared process of problem solving. You have to be fair, and it helps if you can be calm. If this is a small conflict over email, then clarifying the misunderstanding can go a long way in addressing the problem. It can even be helpful if you point out that misunderstanding is really common in emails. Of course, people already know this, but having the leader acknowledge it gives people an opportunity to make peace and to clarify their points without feeling blamed, right? It allows them to sort of save face. If this is a bigger problem that taps into longer systemic issues like inequity, harassment, bullying, or toxic kind of climate in your team, then clearly you need to do additional work to address those bigger issues. Managing the immediate conflict in those situations is necessary, but it won't address those larger problems. So in this talk today, we've really been more focusing on the interpersonal conflicts that will arise out of misunderstanding, right? So in summary, as we're working remotely, we need to rely on technologies like email that remove a lot of context and interaction that we're used to in our face-to-face conversations. This means there's more opportunities for miscommunication and misunderstanding, which can grow into unproductive conflicts. To avoid those, we can try to build clarity and kindness into our own messages. We can anticipate misunderstandings and treat them as problems to be solved together, rather than terrible failures of our communication. Managing online conflicts requires patience. So skills like paraphrasing, I statements, inviting response can go a long way to helping you build shared understanding. And they may even help you move your team from a negative personal conflict to a place where they can learn from disagreement. So I hope these tips are helpful for you today, and that if you find yourself dealing with misunderstanding and conflict via technology, that you feel more well prepared to deal with that and help your team be successful.